Welcome to another episode of the Patio Pioneer Podcast, where we're after clear thinking in very complex agriculture. You know, there's a lot of noise in agriculture, whether it's markets, policies, input costs, interest rates, straight or Hormuz, whatever Secretary Rollins or Trump says. And depending on who you listen to, we're either heading into a financial crisis or right on the edge of a golden age in agriculture. But underneath it all, there's a lot of uncomfortable questions. And I have a guest today, Mr. Shay Foulk from AgView Solutions and a farmer from north of Peoria, Illinois. Shay works directly with farmers throughout the Midwest, through peer groups, through Profit Manager, and diving deep into operation. So he's not reacting to headlines. He gets to see numbers that are actually on farms. So Shay, welcome to the patio.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, we're not about softballs around here. It's early in the morning, so we're not hitting any bourbon. So what I'm going to hit you with is, Shay, we're hearing a lot from ag media, from Washington, from the coffee shop about a financial crisis on U.S. farms. You're inside the numbers every day, so I ask you bluntly, are we in a real crisis, or are we just seeing a gap between the best operators and everyone else?
I think it's a K-shaped economy. You have the people that are handling the situation that we're in really well because of how they've poised themselves over the last 5 years in particular. But, you know, from an operational standpoint, what we've seen is good operators, good business decision makers really accelerate and lean into the hard times. And then folks that, maybe didn't have some strategic planning in place, maybe had a lot of opportunities come at them at once that they didn't think through are struggling. And that's not to throw rocks in a glass house. That's just saying that there is a stark contrast out there with how different operations approach what they do. And, sometimes that's coming home to roost here in the last year or so.
As a stress from a financial standpoint, inputs, prices that we receive for commodities, is that gap between those people at the top of the K and the top of the bottom getting wider?
We talk a lot about like the procurement side as well as the marketing side and how it impacts the operations that have set themselves apart versus those that are, maybe not taking advantage of all the opportunities. Some of it's scale, and some of it is just aggressiveness and being proactive with how they approach things. As an example, farm operations that knew their numbers in late 2025 headed into 2026 were able to run cash flow opportunities and say, yes, fertilizer seems high right now, but I know that I can make good decisions. Look at how rapidly that's changed over the last 5 months as those prices continue to skyrocket. Personally, within most operations, we don't actually see fuel having that big of an impact. It's more so on the fertilizer side, just from a transparency standpoint there. But then also when you think about the strategies that go into marketing, do you have a good relationship with your grain merchandiser? Are you selling 100,000 bushels at a time, or are you selling 1,000 bushels at a time? Those little decisions continue to stack up for or against you, depending on how you've approached that. And no one has a crystal ball. I mean, last year was a great example when you saw the pricing highs in early February. It never came above that insurance pricing period. But again, just being forward thinking, knowing where your numbers are, that has created that divergence. And certainly everybody's feeling the stress, but it's maybe not as dire as it's portrayed.
Do the people that are at the top of the K that are seen to survive now, do they have better opportunities than everybody else, or are they just better positioned to make decisions quickly?
We say luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I'm sure you've heard that before, and I think luck certainly has something to do with it, of when you have the opportunities, but a lot of that is built on a foundation of how are you as a manager? How do you treat people? Are you actively seeking opportunities versus waiting for them to come to you? So yeah, I would say that there's a degree of separation there. And you see it online, or you hear people talk about it that, oh, I don't know how they're doing this or how they're doing that. And it's like, well, if you if you don't put yourself in their boots or in their headspace, then you're probably never going to understand it. And that's okay.
Yeah. I think that's what sets a lot of people apart. And I think back to what we've done. It's difficult to make that next step if you haven't experienced it or have somebody hold your hand to say, okay, this is how you negotiate X, or here's how you ask for Y. Are you able to help your clients with taking that next step and maybe helping them ask those questions to their suppliers or their purchasers?
So I'm going to go, yes, is the short answer. I'm going to go back to 2019. And 2019 is when I was integrated back into the AgView Solutions team. And Chris Barron, who's part of AgView Solutions, founded it, 30 years ago when he started doing consulting work, said, we're getting a lot of questions in from clients, and we get a lot of the same questions in, marketing and programs and opportunities and what do we do? And, probably much like yourself at some point, he said, you know what I want to do? I want to start a podcast and just to kick it out to our clients. That way, when we're getting questions in, we're getting better questions. But what we've always focused on with the podcast is we want to provide value and perspective. And so a lot of what we do on the consulting side is provide perspective of here's what we've seen people do that has been successful. Or when we sit down with a family operation, sometimes it's, hey, here's what not to do. Here's some things to avoid. And as you know, avoiding mistakes is sometimes as important as doing the right thing, in how your path kind of gets laid out in front of you. And so, we come in, we provide perspective, we provide value with solutions, different ways to do things. We don't have a cookie cutter approach or say, this is, Jim, how you have to run your operation. And a lot of times we also act, believe it or not, as confirmation police, because it's really easy to get on an island in farming, in agriculture, and think, am I doing the right thing? Maybe you don't have neighbors that you want to talk to or that, you trust to keep things confidential. And so we come in and provide that perspective, and, they might be doing 85% of the things really good, but they want to and need to know that. So that 15%, that 10% gap of knowledge or perspective or making little tweaks in their operation, that's what amplifies the value of what we do on the consulting side and really helps elevate those operations.
That confirmation island, I live it, but as that confirmation island, did that lead you to starting peer groups?
Part of it was the demand for people to have perspective from those that were not in their neighborhood and to get a diverse outlook of what are other operations doing from a geographic standpoint, what are other operations doing from maybe the timeline that they're in their careers, and what are other operations doing that's unique or has been profitable or is really helping set them apart in their geography or their area of ag business. And as we started to hear more of that demand, we knew that we had the process and the ability to bring in the right personalities of these different farm groups, put 8 farms together based on questionnaires, personality assessments, our own understanding of their business, and say, hey, Jim, you need to know Joe, because Joe has something that you need to know. And then when you get to their operation, we always say it's like opening up your underwear drawer, kind of. You open up your underwear drawer, show them your financials, show them everything that's going wrong, and the light bulb turns on. It's like, this is every business. It's not just my business. It's not just my family. We deal with a lot of the same issues. And so that's the power of the peer group and why, we decided, hey, this is something we need to lean into.
I think your peer group and the confirmation island and getting out of your neighborhood is a theme that has been made easier with the internet and particularly Twitter and, let's say TikTok recently. We get in our own little shells, and how can we get out of it? And have you seen that the integration of what you're doing with the peer groups and social media helping with people expand their knowledge outside their area?
For sure. And again, it's not just isolation and how you make decisions and getting inside your head for the operation, but it's also that backyarditis of, well, I think I'm doing everything right, or this has always worked. Why would I do anything different? And so absolutely. And whether it's, finding strategic collaborative opportunities, to keep the large farms at bay, I'll say, and again, we work with a lot of large farms, so I don't mean that in a bad way, but, just from a perspective standpoint of it could be on the flip side of the coin too, to where a large farm that does things really well says, hey, I think I can do a better job than what another operator is. So it's getting them outside of that backyarditis, providing perspective. And what's really interesting from like a collaborative, because we end up working with a lot of farms on how do I collaborate with my neighbor? How do I collaborate with input supplier or have these synergistic relationships to haul manure for a calf barn, whatever. A lot of times what we find with that is we actually have a lot more similarities, but you have to reframe your mindset to say, okay, it's not just purely competitive in nature. There are ways that we can work together. And Jim, where people get really touchy about that is at some point over the last 40 years of, individuals' careers that we work with, they've been burned. And that's what stuck with you is someone undercut you. Someone came in and rented that farm, bought that farm away from you. And so what I would encourage people to think about is we're in a different time. We're in a different environment. It's a different ball of wax than maybe it was in 1996 or 2006 or 2016 even. So, keeping those ideas fresh, reapproaching opportunities, nothing is new under the sun, but the timing of opportunities and the timing of collaborations changed where it might make more sense to do some of those things now. So getting out of that backyarditis, getting some fresh perspective, seeing what's working for others, it has definitely impacted operations in that way.
As you talked about getting into the underwear drawer, you have to be pretty diverse in the way that you ask questions depending on the operation. How do you adapt to be able to get into that underwear drawer depending on the personality and the operation?
Our job as facilitators is to draw out those questions. It's to help the farm operation put together a presentation. And really probably the biggest thing is getting to the root of what issues do you want to ask of your peers? And so I would say go back 6-7 years ago, probably 85% of the people in our peer groups, the farm operations in our peer groups, were people that we had worked with on a consulting basis. So I knew if Jim was blowing smoke about, these are our biggest issues. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're not your biggest issues. You need to, and so we really, and I'm pretty direct with that.
No, I've never picked up you being direct, Shay.
And I try to do it tactfully and be respectful about it. But I think a lot of people appreciate that because it's like, let's get to the root of what we need to address in the farm. My call to working with farmers is, how do I help you arrive at the solutions faster, in a better way, providing the resources to do so? And if that's facilitating the right questions, pulling out the uncomfortable truth out of the underwear drawer, and saying, hey, you really need to focus on, maybe a threat of a divorce with a child. Boy, how uncomfortable does that get when you start talking ownership and transition, or maybe the idea that you're going to have a uncle that passes away and there's no estate plan in place. Those are raw nerve topics that people don't like to address head on. But that's where the opportunities kind of come together. So we help facilitate the presentation. We help draw out those questions. And it's also an understanding that we end up having a lot of coaching with the members of the peer group to say, we want you to be vulnerable with the rest of the group so they can be vulnerable with you. Where else can you be that vulnerable? It's not on social media, typically.
It's not at the coffee shop.
It's not at the coffee shop. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's not even in your church or in your home. And so where do you where do you have the ability to be vulnerable and share that information? And the peer groups have been a great avenue for that.
One of the things that you and Chris have mentioned over the years in a podcast that it's stuck in my brain and I use it occasionally is specifically talking about household expenses. And I think the example that I remember you or Chris saying was you asked the farmer, what do you spend for expenses? And they said, $50,000. But you get inside that underwear drawer and there's a lot of Victoria's Secret stuff in there. And it's only actually $150,000.
For sure.
How do you address those, oh shit, I didn't know I was spending that much moments?
The transparency is the best option. Let's get it laid out. And a lot of times what it is people have tangled financials that they don't understand how their personal cost of living ties into the farm operation. And what they know is, hey, if we're at the end of the year, we got a little bit of money left over, we can upgrade equipment, we're probably doing okay. They'd rather just not know. We always say that people would rather be happy than be informed in a lot of cases. And there's some truth to that. But you can't manage what you don't measure. And so there's so many opportunities today to download an app on your phone that pulls in all your credit card, all your bank account information. You don't have to do the long form checkbook reconciliation that my father-in-law did for 50 years. The technology is there. It's you having to decide whether you want to know that information. So how do we navigate that conversation? Well, we always joke it's, and I said this to my wife yesterday, I said, it's like Amazon's here like every day or every other day, but she's also not going to the big city once a week to go get all the stuff that she needs for our kids and our family and to take care of our house. So it's just a different environment, but it's a spousal conversation. It's what is your draw from the farm operation conversation. And what's fascinating, or at least I think a lot of people will find this interesting, is a lot of times this is not addressed until we start working on transition planning. And you have mom and dad that are 62, 65, 70, and they don't know what their needs are as they head into retirement because they've never actually mapped out their cost of living. And they might say, well, we're only spending $43,000 a year on food and insurance and, whatever else. That's our cost of living. And then you get into it and you start saying, okay, well, you have property taxes. Are you planning to continue to live at the home farm? You have owner's draw for taking vacations. Maybe they have a boat or a second home that they travel to or whatever it is. And then it's like, for the transparency with the next generation, I don't care what the number is. I truly don't. I don't care if it's 60,000. I don't care if it's 200,000. But the next generation needs to know what that number is. Otherwise, you cannot plan for the transition because you don't know what mom and dad actually need into retirement. And so, I built out a tool for that to help you map out by category. It's just a simple budgeting tool specific for farm operations, but they can fill that out. And then they can also fill out what's my long-term expenses. And when you get that on like one sheet of paper or in the program that I put it into, it's very powerful to see, it's a little morbid, Jim, but I always tell people, when are you going to die? Because then I don't have to make the assumption. And they say, well, 2056 or whatever the number is, 2066. I say, okay, well, good. You said it, not me. So I'm going to put that number in. And then you map out, here's all your land payments. Here's what your cost of living is going to do over time. Here's what your dividends and Social Security. And you got to put all the pieces of that puzzle together. And a lot of times what they see is we're going to be just fine. We're fine. We're fine today. But they didn't feel that they could transition out because it was unknown. And whether it was they didn't want to have the uncomfortable conversation or they just didn't know how to approach it. So there's power in knowing it. There's power in having the difficult conversations. And that's where, from a facilitator standpoint, like on the one-on-one consulting that we do, it's much easier if Shay comes in and says, hey, Jim, we need to map out what your cost of living is. let's spend 45 minutes. Let's go through this exercise. And then there's no hurt. There's no judgment. There's no, well, you spend this and I spend this. It's just you arrive at a number. And that seems to work well.
As you've worked with transitions and operations, do you see a difference between operations where members have worked off farm at some point and those operations where everybody just went from high school straight to farming?
I mean, we certainly see a variation of people that we work with. Are you asking about like the intricacies or the differences between them?
Well, not necessarily the intricacies, but having that openness to have those discussions or maybe an understanding that the numbers are what the numbers are?
I think it depends. Because if I work off farm at Verizon is different than working off farm as a construction engineer or as a finance, accounting or something like that. So it certainly varies there. What it requires interestingly enough, what it requires in those that are coming back in from off farm is you have to have even more clarity on the numbers because they need to understand it completely. Whereas someone that has maybe been involved with the farm, it actually muddies the water a little bit more. They have a rough idea what the costs are and they know what checks are being written and when, and they might know the relationships, but they might not know it to the penny. And so a lot of times there's a lot of assumptions that are made of, oh, well, Shay, you knew that. You've been here for 15 years or 20 years or whatever else. And you cannot assume that. And so some of that is swallowing your pride and swallowing your ego if you're the junior member to say, look, I don't know the lending relationship as well as I should. I don't have my books in order as well as I should. In order to feel that I can take this on appropriately. Whereas someone that's coming in from the outside, it forces more clarity, more planning, more mapping out of the numbers, and they have less ego and saying, hey, if I don't understand something, I'm just going to ask. I didn't have any involvement on this when I was a grain merchandiser for Cargill or a chemical rep with Bayer or whatever it is. And so I think that, now that you ask that question, it's interesting to see the difference in perception there, but putting that ego aside and then for the senior generation to make sure you just don't make assumptions, have clarity, bring in people to help you with those decisions if you don't have the right information, and it goes a lot smoother.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're making $35,000 a year at Verizon or $150,000 as an engineer off farm. You knew what was going to hit your bank every other week. You understood that my health insurance was $175 a month. I'm putting 5% in 401k. You have that experience, whether you completely understood the numbers or not, you had that experience of this money comes in. And I think that probably gives you a little more clarity when you go back to the farm and going, okay, this is what I'm used to having. How are we going to make that transition so I can be comfortable? It doesn't have to be that number, but they have that understanding of cash flow.
And we have a tool that Dick Whitman had developed years ago, and it's just a compensation tool that lays out in a simple spreadsheet. If you're coming back into the farm, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do payment in kind, you can do hourly, you can do salary, you can, what if the vehicle's involved or housing or, cell phone benefits, electricity, whatever it may be. And what typically doesn't happen is you don't put all those things on one sheet of paper to evaluate what is our total compensation package. And what we find a lot of times is, I'll use 60,000 as an example, 60 to 65,000. A lot of times that's a baseline to pull someone back into the farm operation. Now, if it was someone that was working at Caterpillar making 130,000 or 150,000, boy, that's a big bridge to gap. How do you get beyond that? Well, you start adding in, hey, we have a farmhouse. Okay, you can stay there. Well, that's $1,200, $1,500 a month. Electricity is provided. We're going to do payment in kind and some bushels. We'll offer a 401k IRA match or whatever. And then we have a truck and blah, 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 blah. Well, now that $65,000 is $98,000. That's an easier bridge to gap from the $130,000 at Caterpillar that you're making because you have freedom of your time. You're doing something you enjoy. You there's going to be upside opportunities as you take over acres, but you have to put those numbers on paper. And you have to create that clarity. Finally, with that, or as the flip side of that coin is, you got to stick with it. The most devastating conversations that I have, and I just saw a cartoon on it yesterday. It's an old farmer that had died, was speaking from the grave, and his son was standing there. He was 78 or 80, it looked like, with a walker, and he said, "Don't worry, son, someday this will be yours." and that stringing along is devastating. So having a formal agreement in place, having a formal plan in place, putting together timelines and having accountability partners on transition and making sure that this stuff gets done. Transition planning is it's like having a part-time job on top of the full-time job of farming that you have. And a lot of people just need help to do it right. And I don't like getting those calls from the 38-year-old or the 42-year-old that's like, "Hey, I've been promised the world, nothing's happening." And you might have heard me say this before, but if I was in that situation, I would leave.
Yeah.
You got a lot of life ahead of you for no promises guaranteed on this end.
And that is the double-edged sword of agriculture, where you'll be on National Farmers Day and they're celebrating an 85-year-old that's out there planting with the tractor he bought in 1984. And isn't it great he's doing that? And we don't mention that he ran his son off because he never let him plant corn when he was 60.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Believe me, we have someone very local in our neighborhood that's in that situation, and
and then they're sitting at the farm auction. Well, why didn't his son take over?
Crazy.
Anyways, okay, so you got my bias. As you were talking about that, and you're getting in the underwear drawer and looking at numbers, how often do you have to separate tax accounting from real farm accounting?
That's an excellent question. Always. You always have to do that. And, Paul Nafer, who is he refers to himself as kind of a phone-a-friend of AgView Solutions. We need CPA work. Paul helps us. Him and Chris actually farm a little bit together, and Paul's been awesome to work with. But Paul will tell you, it's okay to pay taxes. It's okay to pay taxes sometimes, especially to mitigate just that bulldozer effect of getting to the end of your final crop dilemma. So, that's the first thing that I want to say of don't get caught up in, hey, we got a large tax bill. It's okay. The more important thing, though, is can you understand what's happening in the farm on an annual, or what I would call a rotational basis, as a different way to say accrual. So I want to know that for the 2026 crop year, whether I prepaid in July of 2025 and I'm not selling grain until July of 2027, I want to be able to look at that picture, that accrual picture for that crop, and understand, did I make money? Did I lose money? How is my balance sheet affected in that 12-year period, positive or negative, not just for tax purposes? And so, that's where the tool that Chris had started developing 30 years ago, Legacy Profit Manager, today we call it Farm Profit Manager. That's exactly why we built it, is you'll figure out the tax stuff as you need to. For year end, that's what CPAs are for. But a lot of times that accounting and that tax stuff is looking behind you at what's happened. And it's really hard to drive down the highway if I'm looking behind me all the time or trying to look in the rear view mirror. It just doesn't work. We want to look out the window of your operation and say, what's going on? And, I guess I would refer that. I've never made this analogy. It just kind of popped in my head. But yeah, it's important when you're planting to look behind you. You got to see how things are operating, make adjustments, make changes there. But it's probably just as important to look in front of you too. And so that's where the Farm Profit Manager has allowed operations to truly understand what's going on in that crop cycle on that accrual basis without doing true accrual accounting, which is very difficult for most people, to help you understand what's going on in the operation. And if you got good numbers going in, you're going to have good numbers going out to make good decisions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, switching between cash and accrual is not as simple as just clicking that button on QuickBooks.
No, there are very few accounting systems that do it really well, and those that do it really well take a very special person to run them and know the business inside and out. And it's just not the reality for most people. And most people are going to do it on, a cash basis outlook for tax purposes. But again, it's how I make decisions as a farm manager. That's the title that we should all have, is how I make decisions as a farm manager for my farm should be forward thinking and should be looking at what's actually occurring, not just what am I going to write the check for when it comes to taxes.
I think about our operation. We're off-farm income. We've got non-farm assets that play into our 401k and balance sheet. And what I send my banker for P&L for the farm is different than what my P&L is on the taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And we do that because you take advantage of things that the big, beautiful bill, or what are the benefits of being a farmer that have nothing to do with the operation, but they affect your taxes. And that's not suggesting there's tax fraud. It's just taking advantage of the system. So you've got to look at that P&L from really the farm, and that's what the farm profit manager really does a good job of. Okay, here's what you did on the farm.
Yeah. Well, and then also, though, to create a clear understanding, since it's not on a tax liability basis, is, okay, here's the farm. Now plug in that off-farm income.
Yeah.
If that's what's happening, if the off-farm income is subsidizing the farm, you better understand what that looks like. No different than the government payments. Government payments, whether you like them or not, it doesn't matter. They're here. They're here to stay. So, if you have 3 different government program payments that are coming in, you better account for them on a line item basis in the year that you receive them. And what does that do to your marketing on a per bushel basis? Don't just say, I got a $30,000 check for disaster program number 43, whatever it is. Say, okay, this $30,000 came in. That reduces, well, it doesn't reduce your cost of production. Your cost of production is what it is based off of your yield and your input cost. But what it does is it gives me a subsidized version of that cost of production to where maybe now you're actually profitable, even though the prices haven't changed, because of that dollar amount that's coming in as an income source on the government. And most people do not do that. Most people do not take it. They take the check, they put it in their account, say, we'll figure it out at the end of the year when it comes to taxes. It's not a good way to manage it, because when you're looking at a time period where prices are hovering at or below what people perceive as their break even, then you're struggling to make good decisions to be a profitable operation, because what you're looking at is not reality.
I wonder how many operations that have those recurring payments, or even when take 2025 in the year, we knew what the bridge payment was going to be or close to it. I wonder how many people actually put that on as an AR on their balance sheet.
A lot of lending institutions and for tax preparation didn't want to see it as an account receivable until we actually had payment hit. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for that. But what users of Farm Profit Manager were able to do is take that estimated payment, put it in as a line item, and then see right now, how does that affect what we're doing? And when you think about, I referenced the pricing opportunity of February 2025 as being, the peak for that insurance period. If you knew that you were going to have a payment come in or off-farm income or whatever, and you had that plugged in, and now all of a sudden you hit this rally and you think, hey, I'm at my 10% target margin or 15% or 4%, whatever your target margin is. Boy, I should pull the trigger on some sales. And maybe you did 20% or 30%. Those could have been your best sales far and away, and you'd have been in a better spot than if you had done nothing, because, well, yeah, prices always go higher after the insurance period. There's always an opportunity, which, again, 1 year out of 20, whatever it was. But the importance is having the ability to run that scenario instantly and easily. So,
well, I think about our operation. We had the farm bridge. We knew kind of what it was going to be. We've got 3 equip contracts that we're in the middle of, so we know what that's going to be in February, April, and June. So we were able to put that on our balance sheet 12/31. Like, okay, this is coming. We know that. And as you mentioned, it helped us do a cash flow plan. It also helped us to say, okay, this is how it affects either our price or our production. And I wonder how many people just treat that as candy. Oh, wow, look at this. We get it. Now we can go actually pay that bill.
Yeah, or pay down that line of credit,
Yeah.
or whatever else, and they're not looking at it on that accrual outlook. One thing you want to mention there, this is kind of minutia, but when you brought it up on like the equip payments, a lot of times what we'll see people do is say, well, that farm is in soybeans this year, so we're going to put that towards soybeans. And a lot of times what we encourage people to do, whether it's the bridge payments or the equip or whatever from a rotational basis, is take those payments as a percent of gross revenue by crop. So if corn is going to be 60% of your gross revenue and soybeans are going to be 40%, split the payments the same way so that it doesn't overweight your profitability in either corn or soybeans or wheat or sort of whatever you're growing. And that it gives you a more accurate reflection on what's happening from a cost of production standpoint. And it doesn't overweight your decision as you think about, okay, what am I planting next year? How do I forward market? So again, just kind of a minutia detail there, but hopefully people will, oh yeah, I probably should be attributing that differently.
Well, to do that, you actually have to do some class accounting.
Mm-hmm.
We're set up in QuickBooks, so every farm is his own class. So we have corn 2026, and then every farm underneath it, and then you can do that division, whether you put it at the corn class, or you put it by farm. The nice thing that what you're doing with your clientele is you're trying to make them think on a per farm basis, not a in the year basis.
Yeah, and we always say, historically, Profit Manager, the legacy version, operated on only enterprise basis. Now with the software, we've gone to where you can run field by field, for payments. You can run field by field for insurance, for specific inputs, and have that global roll up to where you can do a projection on a crop enterprise outlook for corn or soybeans or wheat or whatever. And then you hit a toggle switch, and then it pulls up your actuals based on what you have entered on a field by field basis. And so, the ability to run those numbers and say, well, this is what I actually spent. This is how I want to do a true profitability analysis. I still think most people, and until I get proven otherwise, this is going to be my stance. Most people are better off making decisions at a crop enterprise level, not necessarily a field by field. You generally know if you're making or losing money on the farms, but what you want to look at is what's that margin contribution by, spreading that equipment over more acres to reduce the overall cost, or for your cost of living, as an example. You might manage them differently once you know that information on a field by field basis. Another example, a lot of times we have people that say, hey, I want to separate out my irrigated corn ground from my dryland corn ground. And what we've seen over time is they'll do that, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, they'll just put it all back as corn, because they're like, well, that bushel of corn is a bushel of corn. It doesn't care if it came from $400 an acre rented ground, if it came from owned ground, if it came from irrigated ground or dryland ground. You might make decisions a little bit differently on a field by field basis throughout the year, but on an enterprise basis, and the things that we do as farms on how do we actually make decisions, how do we impact our marketing strategy, how do we impact our production, most people are better off making the decisions at an enterprise basis with the ability to run field by field scenarios.
How, as you're looking at enterprise accounting, do you balance I need more acres to spread my costs out with the reality of profitability?
You run scenarios.
Okay.
And the ability to just run scenarios and say, does it make sense? And this is going back to that margin contribution discussion of what happens if I pick up 320 acres. Okay, well, let's say I don't have any equipment changes, and all it is the variable inputs that are impacted there. Well, now all of my fixed input costs have been spread out over an additional 320 acres. Now, if you pick up 320 acres and you need to put up another bin, Well, you need to be able to run that scenario too. And how does that affect my storage cost? How does that affect my trucking logistics, from a locational basis? In particular, when it comes to purchasing land, which is really ugly right now in a lot of scenarios, from, principal and interest payments in $800, $900, $1,000 an acre on some of this ground. That looks a little bit different when you tie it back into your P&I. But again, I go back to, you can be happy or you can be informed. What most operations don't do is take the time to run a full analysis. And when I say full analysis, it's not this daunting thing. You go into Farm Profit Manager, you add 300 acres, you add some expenses, and then that's it. It calculates everything. It gives you your roll up and says, yeah, this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. I'm okay with reduced profitability, with the idea that, long term, more acres, we have a bang up year, we're going to have a higher potential income on that. So it's not all about scale. I would flip that scenario and say, what happens if we turn 160 acres organic?
Ooh.
Okay. It's going to be a 3-year process. We're going to go out in the fall. We're going to till everything. The last pass was, in July or whatever from herbicide standpoint. We're going to seed down oats and alfalfa. We'll market the oats. We're going to do alfalfa for 2 years. And then, come June of 2028 or whatever, we'll have wheat that had been seeded the year before, and that's going to be our first organic crop. Now we're going to run that scenario. Okay. So now you run all the labor, all the passes, everything on that 160. That's just as an important scenario as it is of, do we scale? And add acres and add diversification.
And those scenarios have to be more complicated than doing it in the back of a napkin sitting at the cafe or the bar.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of good decisions are made on napkins over a greasy cheeseburger. Yes. So I'm not going to negate that, but particularly from a relationship with a lender, and maybe even more important, the relationship with your spouse, your business partner, your brother, your dad, your sister, whoever it is that you're working with. That proof of concept is important, as it should be for any business decision. I mean, if I said, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to buy a bunch of potato chip conveyors because they are more gentle on handling the soybeans that we condition in our business, and it's $50,000 a conveyor, I better have a business plan on how that's going to pay itself off over time, or what's going to work. And that's a 5-year CapEx forward look to say, okay, what's our return going to be on this? And maybe it's just, well, we don't want to pay taxes. We need some expenses. So let's get the potato chip conveyors. Okay, that's fine. That's one way to do it, but it's not the way to do it from a business management decision.
You mentioned that you were active duty. What lessons did you take from the hurry up and wait military experience that have helped you transition to farming and working with your clients?
Well, as we record here in spring of 2026, there's a lot of people that are saying hurry up and wait when it comes to corn planting. It's totally different, that recency bias that we had last year. I mean, we were done planting in April last year, Jim, which is just unheard of. It won't be the case this year. So, I would say that the hurry up and wait strategy in particular it's a dopamine reward for when things go right. They're awesome. You spend 98% of your time training, cleaning floors, doing paperwork, doing the same process and procedure over and over and over again, so that the 2% of the time you get to go on a mission and do it in real life and have an impact and do what you signed up for. It makes it that much sweeter, and it makes it that much better is the other thing. So again, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. That hurry up and wait mentality, as you think about how do we grow our business strategically over time? How do we get the best corn crop this year? Well, we're going to wait until conditions are perfect, or as close to perfect as what makes sense with the weather outlook. Or we're going to be really timely with our in-season nitrogen application. That hurry up and wait is so crucial, I feel, for making good decisions. And that's not my operation. I'm not looking internally and saying that I do everything right. That's looking at the businesses that we get to work with and say, they nailed it with timing. They nailed it with preparation for that opportunity. They did a phenomenal job with how they treated people and approached the community or their neighbors or the custom work that they were doing to have that opportunity. So that was a big takeaway for me on that end of learning how to manage your time for the highest impact effect.
Did that repeated training, the repetition of an action, whether you're on whatever you're doing in the military, does that make it easier for you to say, hey, let's run this scenario one more time so that we're sure that we understand, that the entire operation understands what we're doing before we pull the trigger? Does that make it easier for you?
It does. And really, I think one of the biggest things there is the planning and the preparation that goes into the execution of running that mission scenario. Or like we had a conversation yesterday around like cybersecurity outlook for some of the stuff we're doing in the business of, you need to war game scenarios and you need to plan, say, what if. And every mission I ever did, there was a plan. And, a plan's good until you hit the ground and then everything changes. But the important part is people thought through what their roles were. They thought through the communication. We planned the what if scenarios. And then it's just clockwork on here's what we should do and why. And so I think that planning in advance and taking time in the office, not to waste time or just to look busy, but taking time to just sit there and think, what's my storage plan for 2026 based on my planting schedule? When is stuff going to come out? Where do I need to go with it? What does that mean logistically? How do I prepare my team for what that harvest timeline is going to look like because of the conditions that are changing now in the spring? It's important to have that planning and preparation that goes into it. Yeah, and a lot of people listening to this are going to be like, well, we just wing it and we figure it out, and that seems to work for us. It does until it doesn't, and that's not it's not easy to scale, and it's not easy to transition those businesses, because that might work really good for Jim, and then Shay comes into the operation and I don't have that skill set. I don't have what's rattling around in Dad's brain there in order to operate that way. So, the other thing that was from a recent conversation here is you never want to be the single point of failure in an operation. You don't want everything to rely on you. Mm-hmm. And that's as important in relationship management as it is in transition planning, as it is in operations for running the planter or nitrogen application or technology documentation. You never want to be that single point of failure. So plan for that. Plan for that contingency. Plan for that redundancy. And when that happens, it's pretty cool to watch.
Doesn't that come in an operation with some maturity in understanding where you are and how you communicate with your team?
It does. And I think one thing that we've seen, we'll probably do something with this eventually from the consulting standpoint, just because we've seen such a high demand, is where do you go to get leadership training in agriculture? And a lot of times it's outside businesses, it's, forums that are put on. But what a lot of people consider leadership training is going to a trade show or a convention or to, any of the speaking circuits that are out there. And nothing wrong with that. There's certainly great opportunities from an experiential standpoint and opening your eyes and looking at opportunities. But that's not direct leadership training. That's not mid-level management. That's not the person that's not going to be an owner in your business anytime soon, but they're the high-level managers that need that development and training. So, yes, it certainly comes with maturity. What I would also say, though, is it comes with what is expected and required in your business. So, a couple ways to look at that. One, what you allow will continue. So if you allow sloppiness, if you allow late, if you allow flexibility to have your decisions overrun, that's going to continue. And you need to nip that in the bud before it gets beyond you. The other thing is, if I say this is the expectation of how we keep seed stacked in the warehouse, this is the expectation of the cleanliness of the pickups, this is the expectation of how we document our data as we go throughout the year, and you set that standard, now you have something to fall back on. Hey, remember we did that training? Remember when we took the time to do it? And I'll give you an example. I'm not picking on him. He's a young man that works here right out of high school. We say you always message your hours at the end of the day, and if you have any expenses receipt-wise from getting fuel or whatever that you needed to run and grab, you send a message in the chat with a copy of the receipt or the pump or whatever it is. And from their perspective, it might feel a little bit like micromanaging. But from our perspective, the intent behind it is, I want to get you paid as quickly as possible, particularly if it's like fuel or business expense or something that you put on your personal card. I want to get you paid as quickly as possible without having to go through all the crazy expense report and, we'll pay you every 15 days and whatever. Like, I don't want to ask that of my employees. And so we had meetings and discussions on that as a team. I got 2 pictures last night at like 8 o'clock into the group chat of pumps, but I knew they hadn't filled up yesterday. So I texted him individually and I said, hey, when is this from, or what was that for? And he said, oh, it was from 4 days ago and 3 days ago. And I wasn't rude about it, but I just said, hey, what's the process for how we submit it? And he's like, we're supposed to do it the same day, and it's like he knew and I knew. And I said, and I just reiterated, I said, hey, I'm trying to do it so that we can get you paid more quickly. I hand you $100 cash. You paid $93 for fuel. I'll hand you $100 and you got $7 to go get a sandwich or something later. I would much rather do that and not require you to have to do expense reports and all that crazy stuff. And so having the ability to fall back on processes and procedures and the expectation of, kind of what you said, it's part of it's maturity, but part of it's just, the standard that you set is the standard that is expected, and that helps elevate your entire team.
Do you see operations that have some experience off farm, whether it's the owner or the son or an employee, do better at setting those expectations and communication than the typical, I just keep farming because I wanted to farm? That's a loaded question, I know.
No, it's a great question, and I see 2 sides of it. I see, yes, there's those that do better with it. Particularly if they're moving into management positions. That's Dad never did the expense report. He never did all that, the hour tracking, whatever else. But hey, that's really important to me as the next generation as I start managing employees. So I'm going to integrate that into the business. So yeah, you certainly see those processes pull in. The flip side of that coin, and the ugly side, I would say, is you have people that are used to getting a paycheck every 2 weeks or every week or whatever, and you have to file an expense report and you have to do it this way. Well, as well as I do, as well as anybody listening to this, that there's some things in the farm and in the ag business that work because they're a little bit run and gun and loosey-goosey, and you just got to kind of go with the flow. My job description might be XYZ, but I need to go do LMNOP over here today. I got to be okay with that. It's just it's setting that expectation from maybe a job description standpoint of saying, hey, here's your primary goals, but we may need to have you do this. And we had that happen in our operation here where even though we had the job description, even though there was the flexibility, there was still just this pull around like the wording of the position and what they had experienced in the past from a positional outlook. And it just didn't jive. We couldn't see eye to eye. There was a level of uncomfortability with doing things that were outside of the job description that we needed to have that flexibility, and it just didn't work out long term. But the expectation was set, the compensation package was set, and so when we split, and it was family, by the way, so when we split, it didn't make, I'm not going to say it was easy, but it made it easier from the foundation that we had put in place. And the meetings that we had put in place and the systems of, hey, I think we both did everything that we could here, and it's just not a fit. So yeah, it's challenging, but the people with that outside experience can certainly bring a lot back into the operation. But it may come with, hey, dad and the other brother, they've been doing it this way forever. Why are we doing it? Why are you doing it this way? That's stupid. And that typically doesn't go well.
I remember saying in 1985, 86, so I was 16 years old, to somebody that, farming is a business that's a lifestyle, or a lifestyle that's a business. And I think that's what makes agriculture so difficult to manage, because on one hand, it's numbers, and here's what the numbers say. On the other hand, it's like, it's family, and we've always done this, and there's this unknown because it's planting season, you're going to work 80 hours, and that's not in the job description. I would see that as one of your major jobs, as bridging that this isn't a business, but it's a business, and this is a way of life, but it's still a business.
It's so much easier to set the precedent that it's a business that happens to employ family members than it is to say, hey, this is a family that happens to run a business.
That's a great way to put it.
Getting the processes and procedures in place and saying, hey, this is Foulk Farms. This is how we operate. These are the positions that we have. And if you meet the job description and we have a need for you in the business and you're qualified, we would love to hire you in. But just because your last name is Foulk doesn't mean that you get to be a part of this business if you're not qualified, if we don't have a position available for you or whatever else, because that's just not a good way to run a business. The local laundromat wouldn't do that, or the shoe store, or the hardware store. They wouldn't operate that way. Now, there are flexibilities and benefits, especially if you're an established farm operation, that you might be able to do some of that. You might be able to afford a couple extra 100,000 or 200,000 on payroll just to make sure we're all working together as a family. And I see that, and that's okay if that's what you want and you have the ability to do it. But I'll tell you, for us to come into an operation and just talk with them about, well, hey, what is this? What do you have going on here? This, you're a $20 million family office. You're a business. You happen to work with people that are family members. How do we professionalize this to make sure that you still like getting together at Christmas and that you are interested in bringing your kids of the next generation into the farm or into the ag business, and that you don't just do things pissed off all the time? We had a client that we worked with for a number of years, brothers, and then there were kids involved, and they said, we just farm mad. We're just mad all the time. We get stuff done, very progressive operation, but we just farm mad. It's like, man, first of all, from a business standpoint, that should never be tolerated from a professionalism. From a family standpoint, that's miserable and not a good, healthy long-term. No one would look at that from the outside, whether it was a hardware store or a farm, and say that's a good thing. So setting those expectations, and maybe someone in that scenario, and I think there's a lot of farms probably listening to this that would think, maybe we're at a scale that we need to hire in a CEO to manage the business professionally. And then I can go do my piece, and Jim you can go do your piece. And now we're accountable to someone else. And in a way, that's where a lot of the work that we do on the consulting side comes in of, hey, we're going to be that professional third party to at least help you navigate this conversation in this period of time. But if you're at the operation where you need someone there, because I'm not going to be there every day, but if you need someone there every day to hold that accountability, hold that professionalism, you might be at a point in your business where you need to do that.
As you and Chris talk, or you talk with your peer groups, are the problems that we have, or the challenges we have in ag in 2026 similar to what we had in the 80s, but they're more pointed because we're dealing with a lot more zeros?
It's a good question. I'll share this analogy with you. A lot of times we get phone calls. In fact, I would say most times we get phone calls, and they'll say, Shay, I'm in a bit of a unique situation. And I laugh to myself. I don't make it a big deal. I just no, you're not. You're not in a unique situation. It feels like you are because you're in the business every day, because you have that backyarditis, or Whatever you're doing, there's 100 other farms that have the same exact thing. And those are the phone calls that we get. And so I don't share that to belittle anybody. I don't share that to poke fun at anybody, because the feeling is real. But as I alluded to earlier, it's that feeling of being on an island. And so you think that you're in a unique situation. And when you break that down, it boils back to a lot of the same challenges that we work with folks on of, my financials aren't in place. We have poor team communication. We have unmet expectations. We don't have processes and procedures in place, or we're doing a lot of things right, but we don't know how to get to that next level. Those are the things that we consistently see, that we help people work through and help them realize, sure, there might be some unique things, some unique dynamics, but I'm not going to say we've seen it all. We've seen a lot of it. And the underlying thing is those key issues, and how do you address them moving forward? So is it the same as the 80s? I didn't live through the 80s, so I'm not going to say yes or no. I would say from a financial stress standpoint, there's a lot of hard feelings and a lot of hard conversations that are going to continue to have to happen here for the next couple of years. But overall, there's still tremendous opportunities for profitability out there that I would say is maybe setting the stage a little bit differently.
My last question for you before we get into my 5 final questions. Do you think we're on the edge of a new golden age in ag, or are we on the edge of a crisis?
I think we're in the middle. I think my golden age of agriculture is operating with little to no debt, having my kids involved, and having a good balance in family life. The golden age of agriculture should live on your farm, not as a collective. And that should be the goal. What you do in the 4 walls of your home and in your backyard and the soil that you manage and the community that you live in and the people that you work with, that's the golden age of agriculture. We're focused on this big beast that we can't tackle right now. Do I think that we're on the edge of a crisis? Well, I think the same principle applies. Are you beating your head against the wall from a financial standpoint? Have you incurred too much debt? Are you unhealthy from how you think about who you are as an individual as opposed to the occupation that you've chosen? That's the crisis that I think is more relevant on a large scale. And I hope people can take a step back and think about it. A lot of times I can't do it in the position that I'm in, just with where we are in the business. I mean, I could, but if I didn't look at the news on my phone for 3 weeks and I just went about my business and, talk to people, say hello, catch up, how's the family, how you doing, or whatever, I wouldn't know any of the crap that's going on in Iran other than, fertilizer prices up. I wouldn't know about the social issues. I wouldn't, very little of these things that we perceive as important actually affect our community and actually affect our everyday lives. And when I go back and think about what were the issues that a 30-year-old farmer faced in the 1960s, well, I mean, look at everything that was going on in the country and the world at that time. And you know what? The world keeps spinning. And they built businesses and they built families and they just did things. So I think we're somewhere in the middle. And I think that crisis or that golden age of agriculture lives in your farm with your family.
I really like that, Shay, because it encompasses all that we've talked about today. If you know what you're doing on your farm and you're able to find counsel that's appropriate for your farm, then you can be comfortable with either the direction that you need to go or comfortable that you need to make changes. And that leads to whether you're at a crisis or a golden age on your 600 acres or 6,000 acres.
And you know what else it does, Jim? It gives you the power to steer the ship. Because when you look at every problem as being out of your control, you set the mentality that there's nothing that I can do about it. And that's the most dangerous spot to be, is to think that you can't impact your outcome financially, that you can't impact how your business legacy transitions, give yourself the power. As soon as you turn over that power and that decision to someone else or to some make-believe entity or system that is occurring, you lose all power to have impact in it. And so hopefully people can refocus and give strength back to themselves to say, hey, there's something I can do about it, and there's something I should do about it.
Yeah, don't let go of that tiller so you can control where your boat's going a little bit.
That's right.
Well, Shay, this has been great, and like I started with before we recorded, the 4440 with the bad injector kind of got the job done here today after little technology challenges. So I appreciate our conversation, and I love your perspective because it comes from a perspective of helping people and helping them find the knowledge that they already have. They just need to put it on paper.
Amen.
Amen. So I got 5 questions that I ask every guest, and with your experience in the military, I'm looking forward to your answers. So what is one lesson from ag you carry with you every day?
The focus on what's important in life, the seasons that we get to experience are true of the seasons in life. You got seasons of renewal, you got seasons of growth, you got seasons of harvest, and you got seasons of rest. And when you can identify what season you're in or what state of mind that you're in, it's powerful in the relationship that you have with your family, and it's powerful in the relationship that you have with, with God and how you manage your business. And that's what I love about the connection to agriculture.
Yeah. And as we talked about with you having a 6-week-old and I have a 6-month-old granddaughter, we're in different seasons, but there's a lot of lessons we could take from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as a season of, renewal, and literally as we're recording here in spring, you're in a season of renewal adding to your family, and so are we.
If you could have coffee with any historical agricultural figure, who would it be?
I think probably my great grandpa. He's not historical, I guess, because I've thought about this question. I listen to the podcast, and the people that have made impacts in history have had large advancements, but the advancement that my grandpa had came back from World War II, bought a farm, bought a tractor, got started with what he was doing. I would love to have coffee with him and talk through the mindset of just starting new. And that's the other thing that we see is people say, well, there's no opportunities around me. Get up and move. Go to, there's opportunities in Kansas. There's opportunities in Alabama. There's opportunities in Europe or wherever, it's like, go seek the opportunities. And I think that pioneer and that, hey, we're going to make do with what we have. And if we can't make do, we're going to go somewhere else and do something different. I think we've lost a lot of that spirit. And, so I would love to think about, hey, what was your thought process when you came back, decided to start the farm and built it into what it is today for that family in Iowa, but just in general.
I love that suggestion to talk to your grandfather. And I've talked about this with another podcast guest that had the same thing. The cruelty of youth is that we don't appreciate our ancestors when we have them. Your grandfather was 75 when you were 12. You weren't going to sit around and ask him about, hey, what was your philosophy after World War II? I mean, you were worried about baseball and Scooby-Doo or whatever. I think that is the cruelty of youth.
Yeah. Oh, it's a blessing too, though. I mean, I think when you get to the point where you can hopefully teach your kids, hey, this is important and focus on it. Well, and actually, Vance Crowe does a podcast as well, and he does they're called legacy interviews. And I recommended to him, I said, you should take those legacy interviews and tie them into like Ancestry.com or some of these other ones so they can go listen to it, listen to what mom and dad and grandpa and great-grandpa had to say. And I think that's a cool part about the technology that we have today is we might be able to do that.
Yeah, you attach that podcast to the family tree linked to Shay Foulk, and it's there for life, not just the Library of Congress. That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Maybe next time I talk to Vance, I'll say, did you remember what Shay told you? So the next question, and your interesting perspective might give us some insight, but what is one quirky or underappreciated thing about agriculture more people should know?
Quirky or underappreciated? I think when you're talking to someone that's not involved in agriculture, what's maybe hard for some other businesses, and not to say we're unique from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is my brain does not shut off thinking about the farm ever. At 2:00 in the morning, 10:00 at night, eating lunch, I'm thinking about what are we going to do next, or how's the crop doing, or did I make marketing decisions, or whatever else. So you don't walk away from the business, and I think that's more of what people identify as the lifestyle of agriculture is, well, we're in it all the time. And I don't say that to make a martyr of myself or what we do. I say that just from some perspective of that's how passionately people care about it, and kind of what they know, and the risk that lies in the business that they have. I would think that a lot of the people that I meet that are not involved in agriculture probably don't think about what they do as a business every second of every day, and that's probably a blessing and a curse.
Well, think about if we wake up at 2:00 in the morning and we see a tweet on X that said, Israel bombs Iran. I know my first response is not to look at the news, is to go to the CME and say, okay, what did this do to corn prices overnight? Mm-hmm. So we think we're immersed in it, which is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
What is your favorite ag-related tool, product, or innovation?
Well, I'm biased from what we've built of Farm Profit Manager. But I think one thing that I'm really looking forward to getting into is the Libra cart. I think it's so cool to have a base technology that can weigh your product and document it. And it's like, what a cool, innovative solution that has it's relatively low cost. It has an impact on your operation today. You can tie in that data management. So I would say that's a recent one that I've been interested in. And then maybe if I can cheat, I'll add one more. And it's just the ability to voice record or note take. And so there's a tool out there. I'm just about to order it called Plaud, Plaud. That's a note taker that you can attach to the back of your phone or whatever. And you can click a button when you're taking notes to highlight key areas. It gives you a summary transcript. And then not only do you have conversational notes, but you can just talk to it and brainstorm and put that data someplace and actually do something with it. So I think that voice to data to managerial decision recognition is going to have a huge impact moving forward.
That's a good one, because we're technophiles in ag for the most part. And I do the same thing with ChatGPT or Claude, where I'll use text to use the voice to text on and say, hey, I don't want you to do anything. I'm just leaving notes. And then at the end of the day, you hit yes, and then it goes through and says, hey, you talked about this and how we can summarize. I think whether it's Plaud or AI, I think that's a good one, that we've got a lot of technology that we can adapt for ag pretty easily.
For sure.
So the last question is, what is one small change that can make a big impact on ag's future?
Just how you treat your family, how you treat your kids, get them involved. It's not forcing them to go out and scrape pens and have the hard work ethic. I think that's an important piece of it, but it's having them genuinely excited and feeling that you're doing something within the four walls of your home that has a lasting impact and a lasting legacy. That you don't change the world in the world, you change the world at home. And so I think if we want to continue to have a really good outlook on agriculture, focus on the positives of it, focus on the enjoyment, focus on the purpose behind why you do what you do, and that's gonna carry forward.
That's a great one, and I love how you started mentioning a little bit about God, and then you ended with family with our 5 questions. I think those are 2 massively important things we need to consider.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Shay, it's been a great conversation, and I knew it was going to be good. I appreciate you taking time I know you want to get it in the sprayer and get some stuff sprayed there in northern Illinois. We're supposed to get more rain here in northeast Indiana, so we're going to continue doing a little bit of planter maintenance and wait for Mother Nature. So thanks for taking your time. If people want to get to know more about Shay and AgView Solutions, where do they go?
A great place is, we do a podcast called the AgView Pitch. They can check out agviewsolutions.com, and if they're interested in the farm management, that's farmprofitmanager.app, and they can go check it out there.
Great. I will put those in the show notes. So thank you for your time, Shay, and to my listeners, I hope you get a little bit about the perspective of ag. Maybe you can take some nuggets you can use in your farm or your own personal business.